Moonbeams and Dragons, Part 3. She should have been smiling. The people expected it, but she couldn't do it, even for them. They lined the cobblestone road leading to the town square, cheering and waving. Fathers lifted little ones high on their shoulders so the youngsters could catch a glimpse of their queen. "Long live Queen Lunara!" they chanted. "Long live the Queen!" But it was all a farce. The crown on her head glistened with jewels, and a royal robe encircled her shoulders. But she was not the queen, not really, and she was beginning to realize she most likely never would be. She should have recognized his traitorous intentions immediately. All the signs were there. But she was too caught up in grief. She had actually sobbed into his chest and taken comfort from his strong arms. He was, after all, the only family she had left, and her father's chosen adviser. How he must have laughed at her and gloried in her immaturity. But youth is a privilege a queen cannot afford. Before she even realized what was happening, her kingdom had been snatched from her, and the glint in her uncle's eyes attested to the reality that the man would never relinquish the power he had usurped. She would be dead long before her 16th birthday. The carriage drew to a halt before a fur-upholstered chair, from which she was to preside over the harvest festival. A footman offered her his hand. She stepped from the carriage amid a cheering crowd, and a circle of armed guards escorted her to her seat. From an onlooker's perspective, they would appear protective, but she was too aware of the guards' true purpose. They were there to ensure that she said nothing but the simple greeting she had been groomed to deliver. She hated them all. One by one, these cohorts of her uncle had replaced her father's trusted guard, and the castle staff had undergone a similar fate. Worst of all, just this morning, she had awoken to find Nana, the sweet nursemaid who had cared for her from her infancy, replaced by a wretched witch of a woman. Her screaming display of temper left her exhausted and throat-sore, but got her no further than her demands and attempts to exert her authority had done earlier. Her uncle shrugged her off with a look of disdain, and the castle staff ignored her entirely. She had but one chance, one fleeting moment to rally her people. She must do it quickly and extremely well, not only for her sake, but for theirs. The simple people at her feet had no way of knowing the adviser ordained by her dying father had seized the reins of the kingdom. Calling himself their high commander, he was busily making alliances with their powerful enemies to the west. The kingdom was in peril, and she, their true queen, was helpless to do anything about it. A symphony of trumpets sounded from above the crowd. Their brass tones reverberated from the jagged cliffs, causing the roar of a great cheer to lift upward. Radek came to his feet, his arms extended and a benevolent smile upon his lips. He seemed to revel in the roar of the crowd. At last they quieted, and he began to speak. "People of Kajir, I salute you. As your name suggests, you are a strong and powerful people, a people whose hard work and great effort has been rewarded this harvest season with a great bounty. We are here to celebrate that bounty in song, dance, and games. Games to be won by the strongest and fleetest among us. Songs to be sung that will immortalize our strength. As High Commander, I extend my blessings to this great harvest festival. But first, let us bow the knee to our Queen, who also wishes to bless these festivities." With a flourish of his hand, Radek turned to Lunara and ducked his head. Lunara threw a daggered glance at her uncle and pulled herself to her full queenly height. A rustle swept through the crowd as men bowed low and women curtsied. But Lunara waited until all was silent before she shot forth the words that would be her one opportunity to rally the people who were her only hope. "My loyal subjects and my friends," she began with a voice that rang across the valley, "I stand before you this day not only to bless this harvest festival, But to alert you of a great danger, this man who calls himself your high commander is nothing but a traitor, a thief, and a usurper. People of Kashir, I call upon you as your queen to revolt against him." She was allowed to say no more. Guards surrounded her in a moment and whisked her away as the crowd broke into dozens of brawls. Obviously, her conniving uncle had planned to distract the crowd in such a way should she disobey him and make a declaration such as this. But the people had heard her. She was certain of that. Moonbeams and Dragons, Part 4. Basil turned to find his mother standing at his bedchamber door. Her white hand rested upon the doorframe as if to give her support. The shadow of something he could not identify moved beneath the surface of her eyes. "Mother?" "Your father wishes to see you in the throne room," she stated. Then she turned and was gone. Something was in the wind. It was unusual for his mother to come to his bedchamber herself. Most often she sent a servant with a message, and she had seemed so strangely distracted. His thoughts raced as he scurried down the spiral staircase that led to the throne room. It had to be about the dragon attacks. Dragons had always been a problem for the mountain kingdoms, and Oscar and Kashir had always faced them together. But with Lunara's father's passing, the two kingdoms began to drift apart. For some reason, dragon attacks increased at the same time, until a week did not pass without an attack somewhere in the kingdom. Now his father's brow seemed permanently creased, and he paced the palace floor till it seemed the stones beneath his feet groaned. But what could Basil do about it? He was not a dragon fighter. He pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside the throne room. His father seemed preoccupied as well, so much so that he did not acknowledge Basil's presence until he dropped to one knee before him. "Arise, my son. We have much to discuss." "Yes, father?" Basil rose to his feet and stood at attention before his father, as a young prince should. "What is it that you would like to discuss with me?" He felt himself stand a little taller and his chest lift a little higher, proud that his father deemed him mature enough to discuss matters of the kingdom with him. But the king did not answer immediately. His aging eyes scanned Basil from head to foot. The look of concern in his eyes was unsettling. "My son," he said at last, "you are to be married, and very soon." "What?" Basil's composure evaporated into the air. He found himself stammering and staring like a knave. Feelings of excitement sparred with a wave of total terror for control of his tongue. But I'm only—" The king's mouth twitched a bit at the corner, and his eyes softened as he watched his son's discomfort. "Naturally, it will be a marriage in name only, for years yet. I am well aware that you have barely turned 14, and she, I believe, has just turned 10. But royal marriages often take place when a prince and princess are yet children. It is all a matter of diplomacy. You understand, of course." Yes, as you wish, father." Basil continued to compose himself somewhat as Lunara's smiling face appeared in his mind's eye. In fact, he quite liked the idea. "It's the only way I can think of to protect her," his father said, a dark shadow falling across his face. Suddenly Basil understood. He understood it all. He'd felt nearly frantic himself since the king's funeral. Lunara's uncle and his fake protectiveness set his nerves on edge, and worse yet, his father's spies reported that she was being treated badly and with little respect. Her life may even be in danger. Radek's greed for power was obvious. What might he do to avoid relinquishing the kingdom to the young queen when she came of age? "Our alliance with Kashir is more than critical," the king continued. "Only because our kingdoms have stood solidly together have we had the strength to withstand our enemies to the west, and now we have learned that Radek may be negotiating with them against us. I suspect he may have something to do with the increased dragon attacks as well. Your marriage to Lunara must go forward. It is our only chance." "But will her uncle allow it, if he's doing all the things you think he is?" "He has no choice. The king agreed to the marriage before he died, and Radek is powerless to change it. I was given the option to decide when the union would take place. We must go forward immediately. You will be married in a fortnight." To everyone's amazement, Radek agreed without argument. Immediate preparations for a royal wedding went forward in a flurry of activity. Basil, however, had little to do but watch. His mother bustled about the castle, barking out orders to the servants, and the young prince spent most of his time nervously tramping about the grounds. On one such day he returned for the noon meal, expecting to be met with the usual commotion. Instead, he found the castle deathly quiet. It wasn't long before a servant appeared, summoning him to the throne room. A feeling of dread coursed through his body, leaving him so weak he could barely force himself to walk the long hall. He pulled the door open slowly and stepped inside. One look from his father said it all. "She is dead, son," his father said just above a whisper. "We are too late. I should have known we would be." Moonbeams and Dragons, Part 5. The guards pulled her from the carriage, their rough hands biting into her tender flesh as she twisted, kicked, and screamed. She was no match for them, and she knew it. But she would make their task as difficult as possible. "Let me go, you oafs!" she screamed. "I am the queen! I will have your heads for this!" But her uncle's guards paid no more attention to her than if they had been deaf, and handled her with no more delicacy than they would a struggling wild animal. Between them they carried her up the winding staircase and dumped her unceremoniously on her bed. Screaming with fury, Lunara bounced to her feet and darted after them. She would have made it to the door before them, would have been through the door, down the staircase, and out of the castle. But a set of bony arms grabbed her from behind and restrained her just long enough for the guards to make an exit. Lunara wiggled and squirmed until she broke free, but not before the sound of a key turning in the lock echoed in her ears. Throwing herself against the door, she hammered it with her fists and kicked at it with her feet until her strength was gone. At last she dropped into a sobbing heap at the threshold. "Well now, dear one, I thought you would have a bit more dignity than that." Lunara looked up to see her wretched nursemaid, the one who had taken her beloved Nanny's place, smiling wickedly at her from across the room. "Such an unladylike display! I would think you would be embarrassed." "You would know a lady if one bit you on the nose," Lunara retorted. "But a queen you should recognize, especially one who will send you to the dungeons to live with the rats. You and that so-called uncle of mine. If he thinks he can cheat me out of my kingdom and live to tell about it, he has a surprise or two waiting for him. The people of this kingdom will never allow it. We shall see soon enough who will rule this kingdom." "Yes, dear one, I think we shall," said the grotesque old woman, smiling broadly. "And despite your impressive display of temper, I think it shall not be you." With that she settled her skeletal form into a rocker by the fire and picked up her knitting. Lunara stood, her fists balled at her side, frustrated and seething. But she could not allow herself to sink into a war of words with this despicable creature. If she was to be queen, she must act like one. Her people had hurt her, she knew it, and they would not allow a traitor to usurp the kingdom from their queen. She must keep her wits about her now. She must watch, listen, and most of all, think. She picked up her skirts, lifted her chest, and with a flick of her chin, floated regally to the window. She could wait. She must wait and be ready. Her people would come to her, and that she was sure of.